get health insurance, get all-terrain tyres right from the beginning. First thing you put on the bike. Learn languages for the route.
Hallo, ich bin der Ruti. Ich bin auf meiner ersten großen Motorradreise und hier in Alicante habe ich jetzt den ersten anderen Adventure Rider getroffen, und zwar Kirk Wilson, und er hat ein Buch sogar geschrieben über seine Reise, denn er ist 20.000 Meilen durch Südamerika gefahren. Und zufällig haben wir das Buch hier und ich dachte, das wäre eine gute Gelegenheit, mir ein paar Tipps abzuholen, und ich dachte, dass es euch vielleicht auch interessiert. Ich habe das Interview jetzt auf Englisch natürlich geführt, und ich habe das jetzt nicht übersetzt, weil ich glaube, viele von euch sind des Englischen mächtig. Und wer das trotzdem noch übersetzen will, da könnt ihr unten klicken und dann auf Englisch oder auf Deutsch, und da ist die Übersetzung.
Hi Kirk.
Why did you do the trip?
Well, thanks for the opportunity, to talk about my book that I wrote about this trip. It was not the easiest one to do. It wasn't my first trip. I took a bike around Europe a couple of years ago. That was a Kawasaki Versys 650, and it was a great trip. But Europe is perhaps a bit more manageable than other places. Africa and South America, the ones kind of everybody aims at. And I'd spoken to a few guys who'd done South America trips. Usually people go from maybe the Cusco circuit in Peru down to Ushuaia, which is a wonderful trip. You see all the great sights of South America. But I wanted to do something, frankly, more challenging. Something with a kind of real edge that would just challenge me in every way. So I took a bit of time out from work, from projects, and moved to Colombia. And I started off by learning Spanish, because I think that's that's pretty important for a trip like that, to speak at least a language that's widely spoken, if not the local.
How long did it take you to learn Spanish?
Not too long. I didn't get fluent before I went, so I spent 4 months in Colombia. Originally, that was going to be 1 month, but I met a girl there in Medellin, Colombia. And I stayed a bit longer. And I got pretty good. I could communicate, say everything about the bike. I knew how to talk about breakdowns and ambulances and all this kind of stuff. So I was pretty confident that whatever situation came up, I'd be okay. And the reason for learning Spanish, it's not necessary actually to do any trip in South America. Absolutely not, to go down to Ushuaia. But I did it because, you could probably tell by the style of bike that I used that I wanted to do something a bit different. So this is a 160cc.
Yeah.
It's a tiny 160cc bike, and I took only that bag that you see on the back. So this was.
Ich hoffe, man kann es sehen.
Bit of a minimalist approach to the journey. And I did that because I wanted to do something that forced me to interact with people along the way. It is possible, and it's a beautiful thing to take all the tools and the kit and to do a trip and be independent, and that's great. But I wanted to do something a bit different, something that really let me interact with people. So my theory was that if anything bad happened, I could ask for help.
Okay, and, so you didn't take any tools with you? Or?
No, there's a tool kit, of course, on every bike. So I had that. So I could, as long as I got an extra bar of leverage, I could remove things, and I think I could change a tyre with it, that kind of thing. So I had the basics, but no specialist tools to do anything.
But you know
serious.
How to do things.
I know a bit. Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert. I change I adjust the chain on my bike. I oil it, of course, and lubricate, and I know how to check everything's working okay.
Okay.
I changed the oil filter on my Kawasaki back in the UK. That's the most complicated thing I've ever done on a bike.
Okay.
Definitely wouldn't be able to deal with anything complicated. So that my approach of learning Spanish and thinking I would get a mechanic to help out was important. Another thing I did on the route, I always went to a mechanic, even if it was something I could do, because you always get a bit of advice from them as well. Like, you're in the middle of nowhere, you're in a small town in Peru or something, and you're thinking about the routes to take, what are the best roads, what are the conditions, what's the weather and everything, and you just, you go to a mechanic, get a chain adjustment. I mean, maybe you probably need it anyway. Get your tires checked and everything. Might be free. It often was, because you had a nice conversation. They thought, wow, this journey is so cool, and just did it for free. Or maybe it's a few dollars, but the benefit of getting that advice from the local biker who really knows where the mechanics are, the towns are, they know the conditions, they know if there've been landslides, all this kind of stuff. It's invaluable. So I always recommend that. Just go to a mechanic for anything.
Okay, and when did you make your license, like your motor?
Yeah, sure. License? So I got my first bike. I got when I was 17. That was in, wow, a long time ago now. So it was 25 years ago or something. Yeah.
Okay, so you're now 40.
Yeah, 42. Yeah. So that was an awesome bike. That was a Suzuki. It was an RG125 was the basic bike, but it was a specialist one called a Wolf, which apparently, I don't know. I think it was just styling on the bike. I don't think there were any actual practical adjustments, either to the tuning of the engine or to the performance. But it was a great little bike, and I had that for a few years. But I was a bit on and off with biking because I went to university. I got a job where I didn't really have a lot of time for biking, and I never really sort of got deeply into it until I had a few years living back in the UK and being stable in one place for a while, and then I got a Suzuki, another Suzuki, and this time an SV 650, which is wonderful bike with a V-twin engine, and it just sounded, for a good, reasonably priced bike that's easy to fix, it just sounded wonderful, and I loved that bike. So I had that for a few years, and then the Kawasaki that I still own now.
Okay, and this bike you brought it from England? Or?
No. So this is another thing about the style of the trip. What I hope to communicate in the book is that doing a South America trip doesn't have to be very expensive. It really doesn't. So I bought this TVS brand bike in Medellin, in Colombia, and it's a place in Medellin called Exposiciones, and it's wonderful. It's like bike nirvana. It's like must be over 100 little dealerships and the roar of bikes everywhere, and there's thousands of bits of bikes on the street, the smell of gasoline, it's a really cool place. And I bought it for, I think it was like less than $1,500 or something. And then I did the circuit, went back to Colombia and sold it again in the same place, different store, but within the same region of Medellin. And I sold it again, I think it was for about $800. So the total cost of owning the bike was like $500 or $600, and that includes a very significant bit of damage, which you can read about in the book.
Okay. So you did 20,000 miles.
Yeah.
And how long did it take?
Das sind
20.000 Meilen, das sind ungefähr 32.000 Kilometer, also schon relativ viel. Yeah. How long did you need for that?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't going to be 20,000 miles in the beginning. That really wasn't the plan. My plan in the beginning was to cross 4 or 5 countries, go down to Argentina or Chile, and then find a place where I could just sell the bike and go. But I ended up, every time I got to a place where I thought I was coming near the end, I just realized there was so much more to see, and I just kept extending. Went to Argentina. Then I thought, well, I'm here by Uruguay. Then I had a friend in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So I thought, well, I'll just go there. It's, on the map, it looks like it's just here. It's 2,000 kilometers, but it looks so close.
Yeah.
So I thought, I just go there. Then I found I couldn't sell the bike in Sao Paulo because of the laws about the importation and everything. So I heard Paraguay was easier. I went to Paraguay. Then I read the history of Paraguay. I realized it was so fascinating. So I had to go around Paraguay. Same with Bolivia. And by that time I thought, well, I'm already here now. I might as well just cross Brazil, cross Venezuela, and go back to Colombia and sell the bike. So it sort of extended, and then at some point I just thought, to hell with it. I'll just do a circuit and go back. And overall, it took I think it was about 5 months.
5 months. Oh, okay. Wow. And was it easy to cross the borders in South America, or?
Yeah, so that was mixed. Generally, I'd say yes. Like anywhere that sort of regular tour, certainly from Peru down to Argentina, it's all really easy. They're so used to what bikers are doing and what they're bringing, they're just not fazed by it at all. They'll tell you about insurance, they'll tell you what your legal obligations are, they'll help you through it. You can usually buy things right there, little things like that. Uruguay was slightly annoying because you couldn't buy the insurance at the border, which was a little bit of an annoyance, but wasn't a big deal. I just wasted a couple of hours, had to go into a town and get insurance. But
so you always have to buy an insurance at the border normally?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
You always need a
third
party insurance. No, you absolutely can. Yeah, sorry. You can buy whatever you want. You can buy global insurance as long as you check it.
And they accept it.
I would say I'd be very surprised if any country didn't accept something that you bought, say in Germany, that said it covered global, and specifically said South America. It's a very common thing to do, to take a bike and do this route. So I'd be surprised, although I didn't do that. I had local insurance every place that I went, which was super cheap, by the way. So I
just wanted to say maybe it's even cheaper to do it locally.
Well, remember, I only had third parties, so I got the legal required minimum, so that I didn't damage anybody else, but I myself took the risk. So it's a different approach. So if you want like a fully comprehensive for your bike, for your health, for everything, everywhere, it probably is the most economical thing to get back in Germany or back in Europe, to just buy a global package that you use everywhere, I would think. Having said the crossing the borders was easy. Obviously, the trip ended up being a circuit and included some very challenging countries. I mean, in particular, Venezuela. So that was something I didn't decide to definitely do until later on. When I started in Colombia, I approached the border and went to border regions and spoke to people there, but they were, in Colombia, they were very nervous about what was going on between the two countries. So I thought better to leave that until until later. But as I made my way back up and I was going through Brazil, I began to meet Venezuelan people, basically, who told me a bit more about the reality of what was going on in the country. And to, you can read more about it in the book, but to cut a long story short, I realized that actually this is quite a reasonable thing to do. There are risks, but they're all manageable. I've already done a trip through the through border regions of Colombia and Brazil, and places that your government will probably tell you they won't support you if you have some trouble there. So it's I was already managing these kind of risks, and I thought it's not a big escalation of that. So I decided I would do it. The border was an issue though, because Colombia and Venezuela at this time last year, they were in a very challenging position. And I think at one point the president of Colombia had said he'd be quite happy to have a war with Venezuela to get rid of the government, which they don't like. Okay. And the US was getting involved. I think Donald Trump was president at this time, and he's very bullish on we'll send troops, we'll do whatever. So it was, you never know what the reality is, but it was feeling and sounding not the best of times. Yeah. So the border was closed, basically. They closed the border, and so I entered Venezuela knowing that the border with Colombia was closed, but I kind of thought by that time I'd overcome so many challenges and dealt with so many police and military and complicated situations that I was really feeling after 5 months of this and another few months through Europe that I could deal with different situations. And I thought I'll go and see what it's like. And then when I got to Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, I was there in the hotel, and I got the news that the border had reopened for pedestrians only. You could walk across it, but you couldn't take any vehicles. And this was it was great news, because I thought, well, there's got to be a way. I got this tiny little bike. It's just like a scooter. I've done this great journey. I think I can talk my way, back into Colombia. I think they'll be reasonable, the guards. So I decided to go through it. And that's also when I started writing the book, because I realised this was becoming quite an interesting story. Yeah. And then, without giving too much away, I went to the border region. The guards would not let me cross with the bike. But eventually, of course, you realise I completed the circuit and I did manage to cross, and you can find out more about that in the book.
Yeah, interesting. I was traveling a lot in Asia, and I always thought, okay, South America is like a different level because it's more dangerous. do you think about that?
There are extra risks the same in Asia and the same in South America. Like the roads sometimes are not the best. You know, you think you've been on a clear road for a couple of kilometers and there could be a massive hole around the corner, so you really need to keep the speed down. Then, you know, so that's sort of the biking risks. And then there's, I think a lot of people think about the risk of crime, this kind of thing.
Being robbed, stopped with machine guns.
Absolutely, like so it basically, it didn't happen to me. I didn't get anything stolen. The only thing I had stolen, would you believe, was the lock that I was using for the bike for the first month, and that got stolen in Ecuador, which is not considered one of the most, you know, challenging places. So, and after that, I just you know, I'll just leave the bike unlocked and you know, steer and lock on, but no additional security, and it wasn't a problem. I stayed in every city, you know, you think about with high crime, Sao Paulo in Brazil, and it was never an issue in Venezuela. It was never an issue. I left it in Caracas and El Tigre and Merida and other cities. No problems whatsoever. The people were always wonderful. Whenever I needed help, people were super helpful, and that was wonderful. Then there's the issue of the police. Sometimes people think maybe there's some corruption and things. I'm sure there is in some places, but I had a good experience. I must have gone through numbers, hundreds, thousands, definitely many hundreds of police and military checkpoints, and it was never a problem. You know, document check, all above board and on your way. The only one issue I had was also in Venezuela. There was one issue with a police military checkpoint in the west of the country, but that's a very particular situation.
But there are not like gangs waiting somewhere on the street and just, you know.
So that this.
I heard for example, as backpackers, they went by bus, and then like some gangs stopped the bus and robbed everybody.
That's an interesting thing. So a bus is a regular scheduled form of transport, and a gang would know that there would be foreigners on a particular bus. You've got time, you know, to plan. You get your people together and everything. It's something you can plan and do. Someone going along on a motorbike on a road, like, you don't know when they're going to come along. I mean, maybe
they
there's
cannot wait for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, maybe there's one particular lane where all the bikers go, but then there's going to be decent security, you know, in all places. So I actually felt on the bike that it was less of an issue. Let me clarify one thing though. The bike I had Colombian plates, and the gear I was wearing was not you know, the best sort of gear, and it wasn't covered in GoPro cameras and all this stuff. If you go on a bike, you know, if you're going on a BMW and you've got GoPros visible and loads of kit and everything, then you're a bit more of an obvious, you know, as if in the same way as if you were driven down the road in a nice Mercedes car or something. People might say, oh, you know, there's an issue. So if I had a bike like that, I would take a bit more care over making sure every night I had a garage to put it in, you know, thinking more carefully about the areas that I'm putting the bike.
But you did camping as well.
Yeah, I did. Well, I think camping's safer, actually, I have to say, because the big thing about camping is you can choose the location very specifically. You know, you can say, right, I'm going to go behind that mound, or, you know, gas stations are always a wonderful place to camp, but put the bike away somewhere out of sight, and then you just a tent. You know, then it's like, you know, no one's. You can be unlucky. You can be unlucky in London. You can be unlucky in Cambridge. I had my bike stolen when I was in Cambridge. So, you know, you can't be fully safe everywhere, but there's things you can do. Like it was easier with this bike, but even with a BMW, you know, put it with lots of other bikes where the bikes are. Think about where the security cameras are, you know, all these little things you can do.
Do you have like 3 tips for me, like as an experienced rider? And I know I just
yeah, they're going to be quite obvious actually. Get health insurance. I always went with the third-party insurance, and it was an interesting thing because the style of my book was low cost, basic, you know, only doing the minimum. But then there was one night in Bolivia when I crashed, and I came off the road, and I was underneath the bike in a 2-meter deep ditch at the side of the road, and no one could see me. And the last thing that went through my mind as I left the bike into the ditch and the bike came following up me was the insurance. I'm just thinking, shit, you know, something's going to happen as I hit the ground here, and I don't have insurance for it. So get insurance. It's essential. The other thing is all-terrain tires. Again, I slightly foolishly, I just thought, yeah, I'll do it on an ordinary bike and what everybody else is riding, a local bike. And then I got to places where actually all the local guys had all-terrain tires on, obviously, because it's the sensible thing to do. So I just get all-terrain tires right from the beginning. First thing you put on the bike, and they'll just save you in so many situations, and you'll go quicker as well. So that's the second one. And then the third one is learn languages for the route. If it's South America, Spanish, or anywhere else, learn some big regional language that's interesting. Not because you need it necessarily, because you can get by with English everywhere. I'm not sure about German, maybe some places, but English for sure. But it just makes the interactions you have with people along the way so much better. You start speaking in English and people are in a certain mindset, but you try a bit of local language and it just breaks the ice and really helps out and it puts people at ease, and that helps so many times.
So overall, after that trip, would you do it again, or like?
Oh, are you kidding? Yeah, of course. This is. I kind of thought when I did the first trip in Europe that this was a once in a lifetime thing. This was a big thing. This is something I've wanted to do for years. It's gonna somehow make me feel like content, like I'd completed something, and it didn't. It was the opposite. It was like I finished. I got back on the ferry from the north of Spain back to the UK. And the first thing I did was go out for a ride again. And I just thought, this is just awesome.
Ja, ich hoffe, es war interessant, ein bisschen was zu erfahren von jemandem, der schon mehrere große Reisen gemacht hat. Es war jetzt mal was anderes, weil ich eben auch Premiere, dass ich einen anderen Motorradfahrer getroffen habe. Und könnt ihr ja mal in die Kommentare schreiben, ob euch das gefallen hat, ob ihr vielleicht mehr von sowas haben wollt auch, oder ob euch das reicht, wenn ich von meinen Etappen erzähle. Ich möchte euch nochmal das Buch ans Herz legen. Ihr habt gehört, also es gibt tausende schöne Geschichten darin. Ich habe es selber noch nicht gelesen, aber natürlich, wenn ich den Autor persönlich kenne, werde ich es auf jeden Fall lesen. Und das gibt es auf Amazon und ich werde es verlinken in der Beschreibung. Lasst gerne ein Like da. Abonniert gerne, wenn ihr meine Reise weiterverfolgen wollt, und dann sehen wir uns bei meiner nächsten Etappe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Was super interesting for me to meet somebody who did such a trip. Very cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Yeah, the book. I got back from South America at the end of June, and I just wrote the thing. I've never written anything else. Never done any blogs, anything, done of Instagram or any of these things. But it was just so there in my mind, and it took me just a few weeks just to knock out all of these pages. It was incredible. I kept a diary every day, so I had the basic bones of it, and then it just flowed, and it was wonderful. So I hope it's decent. I hope it's a good book.